Today, Bear would take actress Vanessa Hudgens to the Nevada mountains. The terrain there was rugged with sparse vegetation and covered in boulders and cliffs. Before meeting, Bear assigned Vanessa a task to collect maggots from under beach pebbles. She flipped stones with a knife and gathered the chrysalises in a bag, soon obtaining a bag of natural protein. At that moment, Bear descended in a helicopter, picking up Vanessa to head to the starting point. The ground was all boulders, making it impossible for the helicopter to land. Thus, Bear had to use a rope to lower Vanessa to the ground. Once on the ground, they had to trek 10 kilometers south, navigating through narrow gaps and large rocks. When encountering rocks too difficult to climb alone, Bear led with a rope, helping Vanessa climb slowly. After finally climbing up, they now had to slide down along the cliff. Vanessa, looking at the height of the cliff, spoke with a trembling voice. Bear found a very thin protrusion on the rock to use as a support point for the rope. For safety, Bear decided to stay at the top to ensure the rope wouldn't slip, while Vanessa had to go down first as a test subject. As the rope was nearly fully extended, Vanessa was still several meters from the ground. Due to the rock's protrusion, she lost her foothold and was left hanging in midair. Just as Bear released the last of the rope, Vanessa safely landed on the ground. This was a stroke of luck. Then Bear landed effortlessly. At this point, Bear spotted a shelter on the rock, approached it slowly, and caught it directly, which turned out to be the appetizer for their dinner. Vanessa took out the maggots she had caught by the lake earlier to replenish her energy. Bear picked the liveliest one and popped it into his mouth, biting down to savor the tasty and juicy maggot, which filled him with happiness. After replenishing their energy, they continued moving forward through the rock crevices. Suddenly, Bear pulled Vanessa back just in time as a rattlesnake appeared in front of them. To Bear, no matter how venomous, a snake was still food. Bear, using a stick, performed a chokehold on the rattlesnake and then let Vanessa chop off its head with a knife. Since the venom was in the head, they buried it. Bear then performed a demonstration of skinning the snake with his bare hands, tearing the skin off in one smooth motion. The snake's body was still wriggling, causing Vanessa to freeze in excitement. After collecting the snake meat, it was time to set up camp. They found a suitable place under the rocks and prepared to light a fire. Before that, Bear had Vanessa find some stones to heat up so they could be buried in the sand and used for warmth at night. However, as Vanessa turned over a stone, she found a scorpion. A sting from this creature was no joking matter, so Bear quickly pressed it to death with a stone. Next, it was time to start the fire. Bear had Vanessa take out her phone, smash it on a stone, and extract the lithium battery. By puncturing the battery, the oxygen reacted with the lithium ions, creating flames and heat. There was only one chance at this. Failure would mean wasting a phone. As the battery ruptured, thick smoke and then flames burst from the pile of firewood. Bear then cut the snake meat into pieces and put it in a pot. Soon, as the water in the pot boiled, the dish of boiled snake meat was ready. Bear, looking at the meat in his hand, quickly stuffed it into his mouth. Vanessa, astonished, watched, and then relished sucking on the bones afterward. After enjoying the meal, it was time to rest. At night in Nevada, the temperature was very low, and the heated stones played a crucial role. Remembering the scorpion from the day, Vanessa tucked her head into her sleeping bag, afraid. The pair woke up early the next day. After packing their gear, they embarked on the day's journey. Passing through a narrow, rocky area, they reached a soft, sandy slope. Walking here felt like being on the moon's surface, which quickly turned into a rugged stone hill. Bear found an active little volcano emitting bursts of steam. Without hesitation, they both sat down on it and started discussing life. Perhaps due to the heat of the volcano, Bear remembered they needed to hurry on. They tread carefully through a rocky area, as the loose stones could trigger a massive collapse. Suddenly, stones started rolling down ahead, making it a dangerous situation. In this critical moment, survival was paramount, so Bear and Vanessa quickly changed their route. Upon reaching the summit, they faced a 300-meter steep slope, with the extraction point below. To reach it quickly, Bear decided to run down with Vanessa. Starting down the over 45-degree slope meant they couldn't stop once they began. The only way was to lean back and run swiftly with the wind. They then took off, rushing down the hill and reaching the base just as the helicopter arrived. Without catching their breath, they climbed aboard, ending today's journey. The guest on this episode was the well-known Hollywood star, Carrie Russell. What charm does Bear have to invite such a beauty to join him in the wilderness? And could this celebrity endure the harsh conditions of the wild? We'll have to wait and see. This time, Bear forgoes his helicopter and personally drives the show's prepared open-top car through dust and exhaust, arriving stylishly next to Carrie. After getting into the car, he stepped on the gas and the vehicle sped off. They reached the starting point with laughter and conversation, parking the car and officially starting the wilderness survival journey. Bear and Carrie eagerly headed up through the forest. But they hadn't gone far when they encountered a wild dog. Carrie froze at the sight, but Bear told her that despite appearing harmless, the dog was very fierce. To showcase his masculinity in front of the lady, Bear started yelling wildly at the dog, which confused and scared it into running away. Relieved, Bear led Carrie further up until they reached a steep slope. He then demonstrated how to tie a safety rope. He wrapped the rope from behind around his waist, threaded it between his thighs, and showed her how to control the descent speed with her hands. Carrie, watching Bear's ease, was eager to try, but soon realized that controlling the rope was not as easy as it seemed. At this moment, Bear made another shining appearance, instructing Carrie on her movements. With his guidance, the clever Carrie finally made it safely to the bottom. The two continued on their way. To her dismay, the first meal Bear proposed was rabbit feces, which terrified Carrie. Bear picked up a handful of rabbit feces and put it in Carrie's pocket. Carrie was speechless, while Bear, unaware of her disgust. Not far along, Bear spotted a cliff ahead. The usually gentlemanly Bear suggested Carrie go down first, frightening her. Despite her fear, Bear did not change his mind, and Carrie had to proceed down the cliff. He soon found a treasure, a partially decayed bird that shocked Carrie. Bear told her that the undigested seeds in the bird's stomach would make a delicious soup with the rabbit feces. He put the seeds in another one of her pockets. Now with rabbit and bird feces on her, Carrie felt like dying inside. As dusk fell, they had dinner, but lacked a place to cook and sleep. Bear observed the small forest they were in and chose it as a good spot. He gathered pine leaves to spread on the ground, using the sky as a blanket and the leaves as a bed. Looking at the golden color of the soup and Bear's enjoyment, one might think he was eating something delightful, but it was a soup made from rabbit feces and seeds. Watching Bear sip the soup made Carrie's stomach churn. However, under Bear's urging, she couldn't keep refusing. Carefully, she took a spoonful and, under Bear's gaze, put it in her mouth. The taste was indescribable. Finally, it got dark, and Carrie went to sleep early, unaware that Bear was setting up a trap using a water bottle and lights to catch bugs for breakfast. The next morning, Carrie sleepily opened her eyes and found Bear waiting for her with breakfast ready. Excited, she approached Bear only to be handed a skewer of roasted bugs. Just waking up and seeing the charred bugs startled her. Bear encouraged her to try, and reluctantly, Carrie put one in her mouth, which completely changed her understanding of food. Despite the shock, the bugs were protein-rich. After breakfast, Bear and Carrie set off again, seemingly challenging cliffs as obstacles. Just steps away, they were blocked by an even higher and steeper cliff. Using their previous successful experience, they pulled out a rope and started climbing. Though slow, Carrie climbed steadily, impressing Bear. Unexpectedly, the view from the top was breathtaking. After enjoying the view, Bear got back to business. They were to paraglide to a small fishing village by the sea. Carrie, seeing the paraglider, felt weak in the knees, but decided to go ahead. Together, they took off toward the distant village. As the paraglider drifted further, their wilderness survival mission finally ended. This episode featured Dean, a renowned figure in American football and a two-time Super Bowl ring winner. At the start of the show, Dean was taken aback seeing Bear approach slowly in a helicopter. Dean braced himself and exchanged greetings with Bear. Unexpectedly, he was pulled onto the helicopter, and as it ascended, Dean looked down at the desert below, struggling internally. Bear, noticing his discomfort, began to tease him. Watching the helicopter fly away, Dean felt his heart sink, while an excited Bear continued to commentate on the desert scenery. They were to spend 2 days and 1 night in the desert, potentially facing many unexpected challenges. However, Bear promised it would be an enjoyable journey. He gave Dean a welcoming gift of a knife and water, making Dean even more apprehensive. Bear then cautioned Dean to be wary of the fierce mountain lions and scorpions in the desert, as encountering them could be dangerous. After passing through a steep canyon, a natural crevice blocked their path. Bear skillfully used the human bridge technique to cross it, and Dean quickly learned Bear's method and successfully crossed the crevice too. When Bear saw the snake, his reaction was completely different. He walked over with a smile, excitedly shouting that they had food for the evening. Dean watched Bear's handling of the situation, too afraid to approach. Even when Bear asked him to pass a knife, Dean only dared to throw it from a distance. Bear caught the knife and quickly processed the food, which horrified Dean standing by. After Bear packed up the food, Dean silently followed him. Just a few steps later, they reached the edge of a cliff. Bear, an old hand at this, was unfazed by the height. He explained to Dean while tying a rope to a tree, then quickly rappelled down before Dean could react. Dean, not to be outdone, followed Bear's instructions and successfully descended the cliff. But to his surprise, there was another cliff below the first one. Hearing they had to go down another layer, and that this cliff was even steeper, Dean admitted he was close to breaking down. Bear demonstrated first, and Dean had no choice but to follow, though the process was rough. He successfully reached the bottom only to fall into a mud pit. As it grew dark, they decided to find a place to make a fire and sleep. The flat ground they chose was nice, with a distant view of snowy mountains, making for a magnificent scene. Bear expertly took out flint to start a fire. Bear had previously caught some spicy strips and started roasting them on the fire. He couldn't wait for the meat to fully cook before he began eagerly eating. Watching Bear enjoy his meal, Dean's eyebrows twisted into knots. Despite Bear inviting him to eat several times, Dean firmly refused. As darkness completely fell, Bear, having eaten, kindly reminded Dean about the presence of cougars in the area. This terrified Dean, who had never camped in the wild before, and he spent the whole night shining his flashlight around. Until the next morning, Dean's face visibly showed signs of exhaustion. However, to keep on schedule, the two packed their gear and set off. Along the way, Bear kindly warned Dean that today's challenge would be the toughest yet. They talked as they walked, until they arrived at a flat-topped mountain over 2,000 meters high. The difficulty of climbing this mountain was not its height, but the loose rocks that could roll down at any moment. Watching Bear's agile movements, Dean still wasn't mentally prepared and cautiously followed behind. Just one rock away from the summit, Bear leapt up in a single bound. Dean, having no choice, followed suit. Despite the difficulties, the outcome was positive, and Dean successfully reached the summit. Just when he thought it was all over, Bear struck a final blow. He told Dean that to truly finish the challenge, he must jump to the other side of the mountain. As soon as Bear finished speaking, he jumped to demonstrate, then began to encourage Dean. This time, however, Dean was not so easily convinced, but eventually realized he had to try. After a long wait, Dean finally made the historic leap, surprising even himself with how smoothly it went. He excitedly hugged Bear as a helicopter slowly approached in the distance, marking the end of Dean's challenge. The guest this time was Lindsay Vonn, who has won 20 World Cup skiing titles. She joined Bear in this episode of Wilderness Survival, facing her own set of challenges. They were set to conquer Corsica, with its steep cliffs and sharp rocks where any slight mistake could be deadly. Yet, Bear was full of confidence and began the episode by speeding across the sea in a yacht with Lindsay. Soon, they encountered their first problem. The yacht couldn't reach their destination. They had to abandon the boat and swim to shore. Lindsay confidently took off her jacket, revealing her swimsuit, and both successfully made it to land. They then approached a cliff edge, where, as usual, they needed to use a rope to rappel down to the coast. Bear secured the rope at the cliff and carefully lowered Lindsay. Clearly, the process was not easy for Lindsay. Accompanied by screams, she went head over heels and hit the rocky wall hard. Then it was Bear's turn to perform. As usual, he was steady, demonstrating in front of Lindsay. Bear did not forget his mission. As soon as he reached the coast, he immediately started looking for food. The small sea snails in front of him were not enough to satisfy his appetite, so he planned to look for sea urchins in the sea. Thus, they both started removing their jackets again. Once they dove into the water, they found that sea urchins were abundant, quickly gathering a full bag. With no worries about food, they were in high spirits and decided to have a breath-holding contest. When Lindsay buried her head in the water, Bear paused the timer. Naive Lindsay did not notice, and kept holding her breath until she couldn't anymore and lifted her head. Bear, pretending nothing was amiss, announced a score of only 25 seconds. Lindsay looked incredulous. Bear suggested another round and dove into the water. Unlike Lindsay, he didn't hold his breath honestly in front of her, but swam behind a rock to hide, creating the illusion he was still in the water. Meanwhile, Lindsay thought she was losing. Bear, hidden behind the rock and hearing Lindsay's complaints, decided it was time to end the game and dived back to shore as the sun was setting. Bear planned to find a place for them to stay overnight, and eventually chose a rock cave that could shelter them from the wind and rain. With a place to stay, the next concern was dinner. Bear took out a bag of seafood he had collected during the day and held it in front of Lindsay. When Lindsay smelled the pungent seafood, she almost vomited on Bear. He then took out glycerin and potassium permanganate from the first aid kit. Under Lindsay's watch, he poured the glycerin and potassium permanganate onto the bandage, and in a few seconds, the fire ignited automatically. Watching the flames blaze, Lindsay instantly became a fan. Bear carefully scraped caviar into a kettle and cooked it over the fire, anticipating a delicious seafood soup. His spirits were high, but the meal soon went awry. Perhaps the fire was too strong as the seafood soup turned into a charred mess. Lindsay sniffed it lightly and immediately showed a look of disgust. Seeing this, Bear quickly chewed a piece of conch meat to demonstrate it was edible and feigned a delighted expression. Lindsay, half convinced, tried the conch meat, which tasted like burnt rubber. As the evening darkened after dinner, Bear and Lindsay finally lay together. But Lindsay was destined for a sleepless night, as Bear hogged all the blankets, leaving her freezing. Fortunately, it was soon morning, and they continued on their journey. After a short walk, they reached a canyon. Bear planned to use a rope secured across to the mountain on the other side with a harpoon, which piqued Lindsay's curiosity. She eagerly volunteered to try, but was unsuccessful. Next, Bear took over. With just a casual shot, he securely fixed the rope to a rock. He then demonstrated how to use the rope to climb across. When it was Lindsay's turn, she followed Bear's example, carefully and cutely. Bear encouraged her continuously until she also successfully reached the other side. Once they climbed to the mountaintop, their 2-day journey was nearing its end. With Lindsay firing a flare, the helicopter spotted them. Although Bear was reluctant to part with Lindsay, with the helicopter's arrival, their trip came to an end. This episode features Mackie, who joins Bear on an adventure to the Dolomite Mountains beside Venice. These mountains, which were Italy's last line of defense during World War I, are tall and difficult to attack, and their extreme cold also brought great trouble to the soldiers who came here. To meet Anthony quickly, Bear decides to parachute down from the ridge. After preparing, he jumps and lands perfectly at the foot of the Dolomites. Anthony arrives by car, and they both board a helicopter, flying to the starting point of their adventure. With howls along the way, they eventually crash onto a peak. After a brief rest, they proceed along the ridge. Upon reaching a canyon, they face their first challenge, descending 60 meters down the slope. A significant challenge for Anthony, who is unprepared for such a scene. Fortunately, Anthony reaches the bottom safely, and Bear skillfully descends using ropes. After a brief rest, they continue on their way. They need to climb up the other side of the canyon, using steel cables laid by soldiers during the war. The ascent is somewhat easier than the descent, but not without dangers, as the cliff on this side is over 90 meters high with loose rocks everywhere. Anthony's rope hook catches on a cable, and a misstep onto snowy footholds causes him to dangle by one foot, but he safely follows Bear to the top. Bear finds something interesting at his feet: bullets left by a sniper from World War I. Although they can't be fired now, the gunpowder inside is perfect for starting a fire. With this unexpected find, Bear and Anthony head to the forest area as evening falls. They need to establish a camp and solve the dinner problem. On the way, they find a fallen pine tree, which serves as a natural shelter. The side branches can block the wind and rain, and the trunk overhead is an excellent shelter. They just need to reinforce the branches stretching out from the trunk. With nearby branches arranged beside the trunk, a makeshift shelter is quickly set up. Now that their shelter is resolved, dinner is next on the agenda. Bear spots a mouse, quickly grabs it, and prepares it for a soup. He then takes out the gunpowder from the bullet, prepares the dry grass, and ignites it with a flint. The campfire is successfully lit, and Bear hurries to stew the mouse over the fire, securing their dinner for the night. After waiting for half an hour, the savory soup was ready. Anthony did not refuse the meat Bear handed over. Instead, he picked it up and put it straight into his mouth. After dinner, as it got darker, both of them crawled into their sleeping bags and fell asleep together. The next morning, they were awakened by the sunlight. Today, they planned to follow the valley and then climb up the cliffs to reach the evacuation point, completing their challenge. Not long after they started walking, they arrived at a waterfall, with the cliff they needed to climb located behind it. The cold weather had covered the waterfall in ice, so they had to secure anti-slip chains to their feet to ensure safety. After crossing the icy layer, they reached the base of the waterfall. On the mountain, Bear had already set up climbing ropes, which would help them ascend the 30-meter-high cliff. Anthony went first, using both hands and feet, but he slipped on the cliff face. The cold weather and his body weight made it hard for him, and he shouted in distress. There was no turning back, and he had to struggle up bit by bit. Finally, Anthony successfully reached the top and collapsed like a salted fish. Then it was Bear's turn. His movements were much more practiced compared to Anthony. Afterwards, to help restore circulation to Anthony's numb hands, they both swung their arms around in a somewhat comical fashion. After this brief interlude, they continued on their way toward the evacuation point. Passing through the woods, they reached the evacuation point in the sunlight. As they fired a flare, the rescue helicopter spotted them and lowered a rope. Like fish being reeled in, they were hoisted into the air and flew off to safety with the helicopter. This adventure ended here. Today's guest was Lena Headey, the actress who played Queen Cersei in Game of Thrones, and has won several Emmys for her role in this fantasy series. Today, she was joining Bear on a thrilling wilderness survival adventure on the Iberian Peninsula. To greet the Queen, Bear took off in a carefully prepared glider. When Lena saw Bear's entrance, she was utterly shocked. After all, such an entrance could only be conceived by a man at the top of the food chain. Now Bear was going to take Lena into the mountains using a paraglider to start their exciting journey. Initially, Lena was a bit scared because of her fear of heights, but as she saw the magnificent scenery below, excitement slowly overcame her fear. After a short time gliding, they landed back on the ground and set off with their gear. For the next 2 days, they would traverse this wilderness on foot. Lena expressed excitement about the unknown journey ahead, especially after seeing the beautiful green lake. However, Bear seemed less pleased as he looked at the complex terrain with furrowed brows. With a lake on one side and steep cliffs on the other, they would have to choose one of these paths to continue. After pondering for a moment, Bear decided to proceed along the cliff face. Without hesitation, he grabbed a rope and started climbing. Walking on this narrow cliff greatly tested one's balance. After securing the safety rope, it was Lena's turn. Faced with such a perilous situation from the start, Lena was scared but did not back down. Instead, she continuously laughed to mask her inner fear, impressing Bear. Soon, Lena reached Bear's side. Just when they thought they had overcome the difficulty and could easily reach the other side, they discovered a large gap in the middle of the cliff, making crossing impossible. He tied the rope to a small shrub and threw it down. Lena's mind went blank, even questioning her life choices. But Bear remained calm and tied Lena and himself together to descend. Both landed safely on the ground next to the lake. While Bear was figuring out a detour, he suddenly seemed to spot something incredible and excitedly picked up 2 lamb legs, likely the quickest dinner he had ever found in the wild. Lena looked at the lamb legs in Bear's hands with mixed emotions, wondering if they were really edible. Before she could express her doubts, Bear started explaining that the lamb legs appeared to have been gnawed on. Lena frowned even more, but Bear seemed unconcerned and even excitedly told her that he could already smell the delicious scent of lamb marrow. He then stuffed the lamb legs into Lena's backpack, despite her reluctance. Determined to use these vulture-nibbled lamb legs for dinner, Bear decided to find a place to camp as the sun set. The flat grove nearby was perfect for overnighting, not only because it had dry wood for fire, but also because it was close to a water source. As for the bed, they could lay down the previously carried glider as it was an excellent insulating material. However, just having it was clearly not enough to spend the night, so Bear started looking for dry branches to build a fire. Just then, a wolf spider caught Bear's attention. Excited, Bear picked it up with a stick, wanting Lena to greet it. Lena quickly hid far away at the sight. This sparked a prank idea in Bear's mind. However, to ensure a peaceful sleep at night, Lena had no choice but to take the spider and try to place it far from their camp. When dinner time finally arrived, Bear was filled with energy at the thought of juicy lamb marrow sizzling in the pan. Using a small knife, he broke the lamb leg bones and showed the fresh red marrow to Lena. Her resistant expression made it clear she was less than thrilled to eat. But that did not dampen Bear's spirits. He roasted the marrow over the fire, drying it out quickly. Offering Lena a piece first, he invited her to try it. Despite her reluctance, she slowly brought it to her mouth to take a bite, needing the energy. As night fell, and they were assured by the presence of the glider, Bear slept soundly. Lena, however, troubled by thoughts of the spider she had released, found it hard to sleep. As dawn broke, industrious Bear was up again, laying branches on the ground to build a raft to leave the area. Watching busy Bear, Lena suddenly felt he was capable of anything. After some effort, a simple raft was ready and passed the test, successfully carrying them to shore. They continued up the hillside, and upon reaching the summit, Lena was stunned by the breathtaking scenery that resembled a hidden paradise. The getaway speedboat awaited them in the river below. Although the boat was close, they couldn't easily reach it due to a cliff separating them. For Bear, the cliff was no issue. A simple jump would do. But for Lena, who feared heights, it was a challenge. Bear encouraged her repeatedly until, finally, she gathered her courage. Hand in hand, they jumped off the cliff and swam to the speedboat, marking the end of their thrilling journey. The guest for this episode was Marshawn Lynch, a 5-time Pro Bowl star known for his fierce playing style and nicknamed Beast Mode. Now, this beast would join Bear on an unpredictable survival adventure in the Corsican mountains. Bear was eager to see just how brave the big man was. After their helicopter passed through the mountainous valleys, Bear and Marshawn finally met. Once they reached the landing spot, Marshawn's legs were shaking. He kept checking if he was standing on solid ground. Only then, looking around at the wild, desolate landscape, did he realize the adventure had truly begun. While Marshawn was overwhelmed, Bear was thrilled, feeling right at home. Their first task was to descend to the bottom of the valley, a thrilling yet scary prospect for Marshawn, who had no wilderness experience. They hadn't gone far when Bear spotted wild boar droppings on a rock. They followed the boar's tracks, and after passing through some rocks, Bear saw half of the boar's body sticking out of the bushes. Excited, he chose not to hunt it directly, but instead hid with Marshawn. He planned to make a spear by tying his knife to a stick. With the spear ready, Marshawn felt braver and even asked Bear if they should just grab it. Bear agreed immediately, and they approached the boar stealthily. Unaware, the boar panicked and ran, howling miserably. By the time Marshawn caught up, the boar had vanished. Suddenly, they found the boar dead at the bottom of a cliff. Bear realized that the chase had driven it off the edge. Delighted, Bear took out a rope and planned for Marshawn to help haul the boar up. Marshawn was stunned, realizing the danger of the sheer drop below them. However, considering the prospect of a hearty dinner, he reluctantly agreed and carefully moved toward the boar with the rope. Once he secured the boar's head with the rope, it was Bear's turn to perform. He pulled with all his strength, lifting both 250-pound Marshawn and the 150-pound boar. After some thought, Bear decided not to take the entire boar because it was too heavy. He smeared some of the boar's blood on Marshawn's face to celebrate their victory. As dusk fell, they decided to set up camp in a nice clearing nearby, using small trees as part of their shelter. When he heard he would be sleeping next to Bear, Marshawn immediately objected and made a small den for himself using spruce branches. Then came Bear's cooking time. He convinced Marshawn to cut a small lock of hair to use as tinder. Soon, Bear was roasting the freshly cut boar meat over the fire. While waiting, Bear handed Marshawn a bag of candy, treating him like a child. The big man was clearly enjoying it. The pork was soon ready, and Bear handed a piece to Marshawn. Even without any seasoning, Marshawn was amazed at how delicious it tasted. The next morning, after packing up their gear, the two set off again. Today, Bear prioritized making headway. They reached a cliff, and Bear decided to descend through a narrow cave entrance nearby. Although the entrance was tight, Marshawn managed to squeeze through. It was much easier for Bear to get through. However, their path was then blocked by another cliff over 70 meters high, which frightened Marshawn. Despite Bear leading the way, Marshawn proceeded with caution. He struggled at the base of the cliff while Bear coached him from a distance. Marshawn's movements were clumsy, but he climbed steadily and finally reached the top safely. They continued down the mountain path until they arrived next to a small road where two military off-road vehicles approached. After some greetings, Bear and Marshawn hitched a ride, thus concluding their wilderness adventure.